Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Today we're going to tackle yellow armor on a Republic Grenadier from Anvil Industry. Now these guys originated from a game called Afterlife, which unfortunately Anvil aren't still producing, but the miniatures are essentially being retooled. If you cruise to the website and check out the resin section for the Grenadiers, it does say in a couple of months' time that they ought to be available again. Where did this guy come from? The Digital Forge. So this is a 3D print from my Mars 2 Pro, and I'm really pleased with the result. These guys are cool. They're one of those really neat sci-fi designs that works for just about anything. Now they're available for November. They are this month's Patreon release, but they will also be available later on as either individual purchases or the packs on the website. And like I mentioned, if you don't have a 3D printer, don't worry about it, because coming soon will be resin versions, and hooray, because they are so cool. The pack this month though, $9? It is dollars that they operate in, isn't it? It is bonkers. It's larger than some of the previous Patreon releases too, with additional bits and poses and such. But I will link to the release for that, so you can go check out all of the parts that are available. So as always for this guy, all of the paints will be listed in the description below. Let's get started. Now, really quickly, there is one thing I wanted to point out about this month's digital release that I actually really like. Obviously, as always, you're going to get all of the parts individually. I've got a couple of heads missing from this little display, but you can see how the parts would fit together. But as well, they've included a bunch of little pre-assembled, essentially top torsos with the battle rifles. So if you want to very quickly just knock out a bunch of, unit fillers, that's quite a nice touch. Anyhow, what I'm going to do is assemble the fella as I want to, and let's go ahead and get started painting. Now that is bright. That is so bright. You guys have seen the finished product, so you know whether or not this is going to turn out, but at the moment, I don't, so I've got to keep the faith, like I always say. I've started off by priming this fella first with a white spray, and then I've given him an Army Painter Daemonic Yellow spray over the top of that. It's important because Daemonic Yellow is so bright that you give it something to key on to first rather than just the bare plastic. You can spray it over bare plastic a couple of times, build up that color, but I've always gotten a better result by starting with a very light white spray. It doesn't have to be perfect, you're just looking to get those larger, flatter panels nice and bright. But I am going to go ahead, I have some Demonic Yellow here from the pot, and I'm just going to solidify this color quickly in some of the areas where I might have either missed or been a little nervous about hitting that yellow too thick. Now it's worth pointing out, if you want to stick to Citadel products, Flesh Gets Yellow is almost a dead ringer for this, so it will look pretty much identical. Now, once he's adequately yellow, I'm going to get some Wrack White, which is a dry paint. You could use Praxetti White or even Terminatus Stone. Wrack White is kind of the middle ground. It's got a very slight peachy tone to it, which is going to work really well for our yellow. So I'm using a makeup brush, because nice soft bristles. I'm probably not going to apply too much wherever I dry brush. And I'm going to start by just flicking along the edge of the base to get an idea of what I'll leave behind. So let's start just lightly dry brushing all of the armor panels. Obviously you're going to end up hitting some other parts of the model, don't worry about it. All we're going to do is make sure that we are catching the edges of any sharp detail and leave a little bit of Wrack White behind there. Now our dude is practically glowing, and you'll see some areas where the armor is going to look a little bit chalky, but honestly I'm fine with that. I kind of like that look. What I'm going to do now is a little bit of red up on the shoulder pad, because I've seen that on the the old Grenadiers, and I thought that looked really cool. I'm guessing it's like a unit marking or something. Now I'm doing this now because if I mess up, I can go back with the Demonic Yellow before our next stage. So with a little bit of that Evil Sunz Scarlet, let's start by painting a straight line, straight as possible down the center first. Then I can bulk that out very slowly. Now I think that's a little off up towards the corner, but that is straight enough for me. That'll do. I don't want to push my luck. I've got now some Seraphim Sepia, and we're going to apply this over pretty much the whole model. I want to make sure that I'm going to shade all of the armor. Now you could use Wrack White shade if you wanted a slightly peachier yellow. Seraphim Sepia, of course, is going to give us a slightly more yellow finish. Oh, that's reassuring. That is so, that is so much less shocking. Yeah, I'm going to apply this over everything. Don't let it pool on big flat areas like this. So if you splodge it on and you get these big marks, you can just move it away while it's still wet. So let's shade all of this dude, make him look a little more reasonable. Now isn't that magic? What a difference a shade makes. Now that's toned everything down, and it's also let us keep that highlight, which is pretty cool. It looks a little chalky in some areas, but like I said, I'm not too fussed about that, and I actually kind of like the look. Now when it comes to painting the undersuit on this guy, it's worth thinking about how much essentially modern military gear is different colors to the uniform, because I think we tend to overthink what we're doing when we paint these guys. Most gear is going to be painted to the same color, so instead of doing gray straps, brown boots, all that sort of carry-on, there's only going to be a couple of colors. So I'm going to do his undersuit. I have here black gray from Vallejo. Again, if you want to stick to Citadel, you could use, this is Eshin gray, exactly the same color, but you'll see why in a second. The coverage on this, with all the love in the world to Eshin gray, this is way better. And the reason why I want better coverage is because if I have to paint an area once, I'm less likely to make a mistake and have to come back and try and tidy up that yellow. Now some of these areas are going to be quite small, like obviously his butt's all hanging out, but some of these areas, like this little bit on his boot here, are quite small. So I'll swap to a smaller brush for those. But otherwise, let's paint in some of the undersuit. Here we go, with black grey. Now that's the stage where you're really going to want to slow down, take your time, and if you do make any mistakes, what you can do is go back to a little dot of aerial yellow, which is a slightly deeper yellow than what we would have used originally, and just cover over. Let any little mistakes dry before you do that though, otherwise you're going to smear that color around, and that's not what you want. Now for some of the brown details, like boots and gloves, I've got here Thondia Brown. And a few of you have asked, well, what does that look like compared to something else? It is a little darker than, what's it called, Dryad Bark. No matter which one you choose, like obviously red leather or brown leather, whatever way you want to do it. I'm going to put this over his gloves and his boots and belt. Now the old examples on the Anvil website also have their leather equipment painted in this, so any pouches and what have you. Works perfectly fine, I think. This is probably going to take 2 coats, but as always, there we go. You can be the judge of that. Now after those 2 coats, you'll get a nice solid brown. I like Thondia Brown because it is still quite dark, but it's not quite as cold as Dryad Bark would be in this place. I want the red marking and the browns to work fairly well together. But we're going to move on to his weapon. And for this, I'm going to use Iron Warriors, which is a color I don't use very often, because ordinarily I like a brighter metallic color. But in this case, I want his armor to really glow. That ought to be the star of the show. So I'm going to use this dark gunmetal color. And yeah, I'm going to paint in his weapon with this. I'll also do the little dealy bopper on the side of his head here with this, but I am going to swap to a smaller brush for that. And when it comes to the little doubler on the side of his head, I figured these little roundel parts would be integral to the helmet, but this thing would be like a bolt-on. Obviously, I'm just making up what I think looks cool, and it's quicker to paint. You know, I'm going to move on now, and we are going to Nuln Oil all of those details. So starting with his weapon, just a quick coat of this over the top, and over the brown, and over the undersuit. So in some areas you are definitely going to want to swap to a smaller brush. Now while that's drying, you can carry on working. I've got a little bit of white scar here, and I'm going to paint in his visor. Now the easiest way to do this is going to be to essentially paint the top half, wait for that to dry, and then flip him upside down so that you'll find it easier to reach from the opposite angle. But of course, I got to do the first part and then let that dry. Let's have a look at that. Now, once that's dried and you've got a nice solid color, I'm turning to Talassar Blue for my lenses. This is a contrast color. You want to load up your brush and carefully jab it onto the white. Now, wherever you lift your brush away is where you're going to get a concentrate, like a big dollop is going to form under the lip of your brush, a tip of your brush rather. Now, once that's dried, you've got a really easy glowing effect. There are a couple of little splashes over on the front of his face mask that I'm going to tidy up with a highlight in a couple of seconds. But first, you thought I wasn't going to use it, but here is Agrax Earthshade. I want a properly grimy, dark metal weapon. So I'm just going to paint this strictly over the carbine. I'm not going to put this on his gloves or anywhere else. Now, while that dries, we can get on to some of the highlights. Now, it's up to you really whether or not you want to do this at this stage. I think for getting this dude on the table, this will look fine. But I have here a little Flayed One Flesh, because this is going to give us the closest look to our dry brushed color. But I'm just going to paint a little bit of this on some areas where I want a sharper line. Now, you can use your edge of the brush for this in some places. Others, like around his face here, just take your time and wiggle. Oh dear. You know what? I can put a little bit of Talassar Blue in that, even though I've messed it up. But yeah, up to you now how much of this you want to do. Now, I did forget my own brief, and I highlighted probably a little more than I needed to. Don't do every panel. You don't need to do that. But I am now going to go to a tiny wee bit of Screaming Skull, because I want some of these panels to really sing. So just at corners. This one, of course, this is in the purely optional stage, but I'm having a good time. Particularly, these big armor plates up on the shoulders, his helmet, and the one on his back are going to be a good place just for a little of this. Now, essentially, you've seen 3 different stages of this same yellow. So if you want to take it further, you can. It will look like this. If you want to just leave it at the dry brushing stage, that'll look perfectly fine as well. That'll be cool. But I do like how that little bit of extra effort makes it really sing. What I've got now is a bit of Necron Compound and just a very small dry brush of this. Now, in order to highlight his undersuit, I've got a little bit of Dark Reaper, because what I want is a sort of blue-black finish. Now, this will look quite bright first going on, but as it settles and dries, it's going to look a lot more reasonable. And indeed, once that settles, you might find you barely see it at all. In which case, let's go a little further. I have some Thunderhawk Blue. Now, if you do want one very sharp blue-black finish here, you could skip straight to this stage, but I like a little bit of that transition of color. Now, it's a little hard to see from the front, but if we spin him around, you get a look at that nice blue-black finish. I really like how that turns out. Now, I'm going to highlight his leather with Gorthor Brown, and we're just going to do this in one step. And to be perfectly honest, the only areas I'm going to highlight on this dude are going to be the backs of his gloves and his fingers. I would also highlight his pouches if he was wearing any, but he's not, so I won't. I'm not going to do the boots because they're kind of a non-entity down there. By the time we do his base, you're not going to see those. Now, with those last couple of highlights done, he's really finished. All I got to do now is hit him with a matte varnish. I'm going to use Vallejo's matte spray, and I'm going to put a base on him that will really contrast with him. I'm thinking something dark, whether it were urban or forest environment, a darker base is really going to set this dude off. But at any rate, let's get a look at what that looks like when it's all finished. And there at last, our Republic Grenadier is complete. Now, yellow's got a reputation as being difficult to paint, but I think if you go into it with the right mindset of not overthinking what bits are supposed to be armor and which are padded gear and what have you, well, you can pretty much cheat. And having the right primer really helps. It was a massive difference being able to just paint straight over the top of what was already a prepared yellow for me. Now, there's a lot here that you could carry on doing, but I think this is going to work perfectly well and will look really cool on the table. So thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my wonderful producers, Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Fred, and Jimmy. Your support really is invaluable, folks. Any questions or anything, feel free, drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time on it all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.